A memorial service is being held this afternoon to mark the 70th anniversary of the worst civilian disaster of the Second World War. 173 people died in a crash at Bethnal Green tube station in East London. They were trying to shelter from an air raid, which then turned out to be a false alarm.
In the air raids of World War II, the tunnels of Bethnal Green tube provided shelter for thousands of Londoners on dozens of occasions. But on the 3rd of March 1943, this place of safety became the scene of a terrible civilian disaster. As sirens sounded out the air raid alarm, hundreds of people flowed towards these steps. But as one lost their footing, those following began to tumble. 173 died, 62 of them children. The sirens later turned out to be a false alarm. Fears that the disaster would damage wartime morale meant reporting was censored. It was only 50 years later that the event was finally commemorated with this small plaque. Survivors, though, have returned every year to lay flowers and have always fought for a proper memorial here. Today, that will finally happen. This was the largest loss of life in one incident during World War II. Far more lives than any one German bomb ever managed to claim. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
And let's join Andrew now live at Bethnal Green. Well, that service is due to begin shortly. Andrew.
Yeah, a lot of people gathering here already next to the almost finished memorial here. They'll be heading off to that memorial service in a few minutes. Let me just show you the steps here as they are today. At the time, 70 years ago, there was no handrail down the middle. It would have been very dark, of course, and the entrance at the bottom was far smaller. And you can see the plaque that commemorates the event is almost invisible. It's so small. So people fighting all those years to get a larger memorial here, and that fight is nearly over. Now we are joined, I'm happy to say, by one of the survivors, Babs Clark. Babs, you were just 11 at the time. I know you've been asked this question many times, but just tell us what you remember from that day.
Only that, oh, do excuse me, we arrived here that evening. We just missed the first bus that we should have got. Luckily, I realise now if we had have been on that, we would have been killed because we'd have been much further down the stairs. But it was a dark, wet, horrible night, and you've got to remember it was pitch black. All the blackout was on, and we were just queuing up as normal, and suddenly this terrible noise came. It was like hundreds of rockets going in the air. And as they went up, so they whistled like the bombs did as they came down. And
so people thought they were under attack?
Well, that's correct, because we'd done a very big raid on Berlin about 2 nights previous. And what we didn't know, it was a new rocket gun they were trying out in Victoria Park, which hadn't been publicised naturally. And it was through that people started pushing. And because unbeknown to us, at the time, you've got to remember, there was no handrails on the stairs. The steps were slippery from the rain, it was dark, and a woman with a baby had tripped on the bottom, and several people had fallen on top.
And did you see that in front of you? You saw people falling down?
No, we couldn't see anything, because we were being pushed nearer and nearer the stairs. I can remember falling over something. What it was, I don't know. But my sister, who was 16, she pulled me out. We then got taken over to the shelter under the railway. Our mother got pulled out and taken over to the church where we're having the memorial. And it wasn't until later that we all met up together. But
and you realised afterwards, I suppose, just how bad this had been?
It wasn't until the next day, because we all met up somehow or other, we all went home, and the next day, I know I remember calling my mother when I was getting dressed, and she was the same, so was my sister. We were bruised from shoulder to the ground, and it was only during that next day we heard about what had happened.
And for decades afterwards, it seems, no one really talked about this, no one really remembered what had happened. No. How was that? How did that feel?
Well, it was more through Winston Churchill, God rest his soul. He didn't want it announced because of the morale of the people, because it was a civilian thing that had happened. It wasn't through enemy bombing or anything like that. And it was just, I don't know, it was just kept quiet. If you were told in those days, don't talk about it, well, not like today, you didn't talk about it.
Babs, I know you've waited out in the cold to talk to us. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm just going to have a very quick word now with Toby Butler from the University of East London. I know you're doing a project about this. It was something that was never remembered in a way that perhaps other disasters have been since.
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the most extraordinary things is that it was only until 1993 that they put a plaque up here at the Underground station, and now today, after 70 years on, we finally kind of got a monument to this. I mean, this was an incredibly significant disaster. It was, in terms of the people, of the actual death toll, it's more significant than, say, Hillsborough, more significant than Aberfan. Not to say that those weren't terrible, awful disasters in their own right, but it was partly, I think, just the trauma of this. It was so horrific, and people, felt it's a very hard thing for people to talk about, and so it's a very significant thing for this community. But also, it really is, nationally, it's a very significant issue as well. And we're doing an 18-month project now to try and document the history of this and try and digitise people's personal archives and try and interview people who were involved, because the survivors are now in their 80s and their 90s. And really, I think this is one of the last chances that we're going to have at the University of East London to put this history together.
So if people have got memories, or if they are family members of survivors or victims, indeed, they can get in touch with the University of East London.
Yes, please. We'd love to hear from you.
OK, just tell us a little bit, if you would, about the memorial. I know it's not quite finished yet, although obviously it's much more significant than the plaque that was here before, but there's another piece to be added.
That's right, yes. It's called the Stairway to Heaven Memorial, and it was designed by a brilliant architect. Basically, it's going to have a roof. If we can need to raise £130,000 more. They've already raised over £300,000 through bucket collections. The trust has done an incredible job here. But it's going to have this kind of stairway made out of wood, and then there'll be 173 holes in the stairway, and sunlight will come down through those holes. So it's almost like the souls of those people that lost their lives in this terrible disaster, will be in the design of the memorial itself. So, please, in this last year, we just need some people to give the final push of money to get this memorial finished, and it's going to be a very significant landmark, not just for East London but also for the country. OK,
Toby, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The memorial service here starts in just a few minutes' time. People here hoping this year to finally get this memorial finished.
Andrew, thank you very much for that.